Welcome to Authenticity Unleashed. I'm your host, Pam Rader, and I've got a great show for you today. Today, I have with me my dear friend, Luke Wiltshire, who is one of my favorite people for many reasons. But his story is so unique. It's so filled with hope because Luke is an addictions counselor and coach, and he's working on the front lines in the trenches with the most marginalized people at the forefront of this unprecedented opioid crisis. And he does it with such compassion, such steadiness. He's just such an admirable person in my view. And I'm grateful to be aligned with someone who is in such service to humanity. So welcome, Luke.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Now, I want to just say, though, that wasn't always the case. Luke, like many of us, didn't have a straight line to get to where he is today. There was a bumpy dirt road with lots of crooked turns in it. And Luke's story illustrates that anything is possible, that there's hope for everyone, and that there's a Turkish proverb that says, no matter how far down the wrong road you've gone, you can always turn back. And to me, you are the living, breathing testimony to that. So Luke, will you tell us a little bit about, first of all, tell us a little bit about what you do now and what your life is like right now.
Okay. I'm a caseworker at a homeless shelter in Kelowna, BC. I work, like Pam said, with some marginalized individuals, people with heavy substance use, mental health, addictions, and all sorts of addictions, all sorts of mental health. It's quite the gamut of things. And then I work with people too who are just, with the cost of living now, it's very difficult for them to get housing. So I get to work with everybody, and I'm blessed to do so. As well, I am a coach. So I do that, and I run a group too, with thanks to Pam through Shift Collective. It's called Loving Your Addict. And we do that every Thursday night. And we're actually co-writing a book together as well, me and Pam, which that's really cool. So I'm sure we'll talk about that. Lots going on, all centered around healing and health and just being a better person, I think, and sharing stories of hope.
Becoming the best version of yourself and sharing that with the world.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, really, really great. And so I'd love to just open it up for you to share a little bit. I know that you were a very angry young man and you had some, let's call it associations with some not very nice people.
With some nefarious individuals, yes.
Some nefarious individuals, and maybe even fancied yourself a gangsta.
I really did. Yeah. And it was quite, that's the funny thing, right? Is that I thought I was something special, but it turns out I was just a confused, scared individual who was hurt, and hurt people, right?
Yeah. You had some adverse childhood experiences.
I did.
That left you feeling very confused and alone and scared and pissed off.
And that manifested into essentially me wanting to hurt the world for what had happened to me. And I did a very, very good job of it for quite a period of time. Mm-hmm. And then addiction got in the way in regards to those people we talked about. When you're an addict and you're involved in that lifestyle, you essentially become a liability. Mm-hmm. And that was essentially when I had my turnaround, you could say, when I started to come to the light, you could say.
Well, tell me a little bit, because I want our listeners to know this. I shared a little in my book, and I don't think I've shared it on the podcast, but there's a specific pattern to how these nefarious individuals kind of groom people, right? Like they noticed you. I know with Nick, he was kind of singled out when he was young and offered to deal some weed for us. And then will take care of you and you'll have money and girls and all of that. And they set him up to get robbed the first day that he went to deal weed. And now he owes them money and he's scared and he has to do things he doesn't want to do just to not get beat up, which pulled him into the life. And what I have since learned is that that's like classic recruiting technique. Can you tell me how it was that, you were an angry young man, but they didn't just come knocking on your door? How did you get into that life?
I essentially I'd managed to hide my anger for a very long time. It was at the end of high school is when I started hanging out with people. I started getting into fights. I started to just be very heartless towards people. And I noticed that, and then eventually, once you do that enough and you get I got involved with being a doorman at a club. I was doing mixed martial arts. I was essentially grooming myself to be the one to distribute punishment to people. And then people notice that, right? Like they just do. Once you start to do that a lot, people notice it. And then I guess the difference between me and Nick was they seen that, and it was like they brought me into a community through false pretenses. And then essentially I was like the cannon that they aimed wherever they needed. And then they were like, okay, go, tip of the spear type stuff. And
Right.
I took that as, because we all want community, right? We all want love. We want to be involved with something. We want a direction, no matter how damaged we are. So how damaged I was and how angry I was, they knew that all they had to do was show me a little bit of love, that brotherhood aspect of it, and then aim me in the direction and shoot. And I did it very well. And they just kept, like you say, the girls, the money, all that stuff. And they feed that, right? They're very smart about stuff like that. And they're very effective at it.
Well, they're effective. I don't know how smart they are, but they're effective.
Well, compared to me at the time, they were pretty smart. So
They were more experienced than you.
More experienced, yes. Yeah.
And so then you surround yourself with more hurt people who have their own rage and their own issues. Now, tell me a little bit. I'm curious about this because I've often thought that who we surround ourselves with is the most important thing that will direct our lives. And so, you might have been angry and on your own, but you're doing mixed martial arts and you're being a doorman. But there's probably, lines that you're not crossing and all of that. But then you get in with these people and there's guys doing way worse stuff. And then suddenly your moral compass gets skewed, right? Like you'll normalize things that you would have been horrified about before. Did that happen to you?
Yeah, actually, there was essentially 3 instances in my life, and I hope it's okay, Pam, that we get a little bit into some graphic stuff here. Not too graphic, but so essentially there was an instant where I knew that I knew that I had passed a line, because when people that are really, really dangerous people don't even want to hang around you anymore. That's when I knew that I had essentially sacrificed my morals and my values and my belief systems for this. I don't want to say greater good, but at the time I actually believed that, right? And what had happened was I had done something that was highly advised against, and then I was essentially taken behind the club where I worked, and then a gun was put in my mouth, and they had threatened to pull the trigger. And I'll tell you that you really find out what kind of man you are and what kind of human being you are when faced with pretty much certain death, right? You really find that out. And I found out what kind of man I was and that almost encouraged me to go further, because at the time, I wasn't even scared. I was indifferent. I was in such a damaged place that I was like, you know what, go ahead. I don't even care. And then to them, that was almost like, wow, we can push him further, right? Like we can push him even further, and he'll die for us. He'll do this, he'll do that. And looking back, that was like a turning point where it got really, really bad, where that's when it
Now,
got.
when you cross that kind of line, what does that do to your heart? Like, do you have to cut yourself off from yourself?
Yeah. And that I had built intrinsically built that into me when I was a child
Mm-hmm.
through my adverse childhood experiences. We
Mm-hmm.
don't have to get into that pretty horrific stuff. And what I had done was I built a compartmentalization skill
Mm-hmm.
where I could literally, it was like pressing a button and I could turn everything off.
Mm-hmm.
So I could literally turn off my emotions, my reactions, um, how I thought about it in the future. Like I could turn it off. And I did
Mm-hmm.
that with my family in the future because it got to a point where my family didn't even want anything to do with me. They had cut me off, and I had used that compartmentalization thing to say, like, you know what? Okay, fine. And I didn't even speak to my family for multiple times for years on end.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't even fathom that now, like
Mm-hmm.
how that happened. It's just like, because I love my family so deeply now that I was able to do that was it was a realization of how sick I actually was.
Right. Yeah, when we have to completely abandon ourselves to operate in the world, there's nothing that will lead us further away from our authenticity. There's nothing that will lead us further away than the truth of who we are, than cutting ourselves off from, our inner knowing.
Yeah.
And there is a big cost to that, because before you were angry at the world, but I'm going to guess that at that point you had to suppress rage towards yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it got to a point where I manifested that rage into an extreme hatred for myself,
Mm.
like extreme to the point where, like I said, when I had that gun in my mouth, it was like, I hate myself so much that go ahead. It literally does not affect me. And
Hmm.
when you have that kind of hate for yourself, you can imagine the type of hate you have for other people,
Yeah. But you
right?
got nothing to lose.
You have nothing to lose.
Nothing to
You're
lose. There's nothing more dangerous
completely
than
indifferent.
somebody. It's funny because there's nothing more dangerous, and there's also nothing more peaceful on the other end of it for somebody who has nothing left to lose. Because, the saying, freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. And it's true. When we lose our attachments and all of that, we get freedom. But when you completely lose sight of who you are, that's a dangerous place to be.
It is. It's a very dangerous dichotomy. And I always
Mm.
say that when I used to participate in AA, I said the scariest time of my life, which was really scary, was when I was indifferent.
Hmm.
Because when you're indifferent, you have no capacity for happiness, or
Hmm.
you don't have capacity for hatred. So it's
You
like
don't
you're in
even
that
have
still.
capacity for empathy that might actually be the thing that brings you back to your humanity.
Right. Yeah. And so you're essentially in this no man's land of sociopathy,
Hmm.
your psychopathy. But I knew that there was that little, I knew there was that sensitive boy inside me, that
Hmm.
8-year-old kid,
Hmm.
because there was fear there. There was a little
Hmm.
bit of fear there. So I knew that was there, which was a little bit comforting to me, because then I realized
Right.
that I really wasn't beyond saving or beyond broken.
So tell us about the turning point, because I know you spend some time, as they affectionately call it, in the bin.
In the
In the
old
bin.
scow. Yeah. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about what happened, and that started to turn things around for you.
The first time that I can say that I honestly met God was when there was an instance where I was actually kidnapped. Um,
Hmm.
and I write about it in my memoir. I was kidnapped and I was tortured for 3 days, and I was placed in a cabin somewhat in the wilderness and left there to die, essentially. And that was where my first um, almost God moment happened, where he was like, I look back at it now and I was like, that was the first time he gave me a choice.
Hmm.
And I made it through that through a complete miracle. I don't know why to this day why they did not actually kill me, but I made it out of it. And then life went on. I managed to heal up, get back in the game. Then I ended up in jail. And then when I was in jail, I had an instance where I got hurt really bad. I was essentially bleeding out, and it was a really surreal experience because I remember laying there, and I remember looking over, and there was, blood pools pretty fast, and it was pooling, and it was actually, I remember looking at it dripping over the side of the tier unit in the jail,
Mm-hmm.
and I could smell the metal of it. I could smell the metal of the blood. And then I remember that's the last thing I smelled. And then I remembered it was like somebody put their hands on the sides of my head, and I heard a voice. And I know it's going to sound crazy, and I know people say this all the time, but I swear, and it wasn't a guard. It wasn't another inmate. It was a voice, and it said, "You have a choice."
Mm-hmm.
And right from that moment on, I have not wanted to use drugs or drink since.
Mm-hmm.
And I have tried to not use my entire life without success.
Mm-hmm.
But from that point on, I've been tested. I've been put in situations where I could, no problem. And I haven't had that urge, and it had been taken away from me, and I have no explanation for it.
Wow. What a beautiful transformational moment. And, I always say the universe is generous and second chance. A second chance is the greatest gift that we'll ever give. And so I'm a big fan of giving the people in my life second chances.
Oh, I think second chances are, especially because I was given a second chance from something that I don't understand, and I'm okay with that. You know what I mean? I don't know what happened. I do know something phenomenal happened. My parents call it a miracle. I firmly believe it was a miracle. But second chances are, people make mistakes, right? We
Yeah.
do. We all do. And whether we decide to forgive or not, that's up to each individual. But I believe that forgiveness is a key in moving on in one's life. And it's a key in any kind of relationship that you have, right? I think it's a vital lesson to learn.
One of my teachers, he says that forgiveness is just forfeiting the right to make that judgment again. We have this big idea about like forgiveness is some like spiritual thing or whatever, but it's really just like when you start to get riled up and make a judgment about someone for something they've done in the past, you go, oh, wait a minute, I forfeit the right to do that next. Like what's next?
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, isn't that great?
It makes
Forfeit the
perfect
right
sense too. Yeah.
to make that judgment again. It's just like, okay, it's done.
It's done.
So it's a process we've got to work through. But I would agree that forgiveness is an important part of healing. And I know that as you're telling this story, when my son was going through his sort of last bout before he got clean, and I'd been talking to you about it, I'd been talking to other people about it, and it seemed pretty likely that he was going to die. And it was my friend Joe Fox, dreamer, who said he was doing an energy clearing on Nick. He told me that I had to bring him home because he was really bad. Now Joe sees and hears things and talks to spirits, and I trust him implicitly. But I was like, really, Joe, I don't want to bring him home. He's kind of a mess. This is not what I want in my house. And he was just very stoic and said, oh, you will be bringing him home. So I brought him home, and Joe was doing a clearing on him, and he looked at me and he said, he's going to be fine. He just has a choice to make. He just has a choice to make. That's what they're telling me. And when he makes that choice, he's going to help a lot of people. And it wasn't a direct line from that moment to where he is now, but it was the same kind of story. Just like he had a moment where he knew he had a choice and he made a different choice, and his obsession was taken away from him. Now his obsession is his Pomeranian puppy. And
that's a great obsession to have.
It's fabulous. Yeah. But I love this, and I love talking about miracles because they're like shy about talking about them. But you know what? Miracles happen every freaking day.
They happen. Yeah.
They happen every day, and they happen to regular people. And whether you believe or you don't believe, in fact, I think they happen more to the people that don't believe, because it's got to be something big for them to get their heads around it. Now, tell me though, so you got out of your incarceration, and you've had this obsession removed, but you don't know how to live. How does a guy go from like Gangsterville to living a normal life? What did you have to do to get to where you are now?
It was kind of like, well, I was given that choice. There was conditions of that choice that I didn't, I knew, but they were unsaid. But it was so weird, Pam, because it was such a profound moment. But I got it, and I
Mm-hmm.
knew that it was, you have a choice, three words,
Mm-hmm.
but there was so much meaning in it, and the
Mm-hmm.
meaning was, you have a choice. You can go this way and die, or you can go this way and do whatever it takes to become useful, become of service,
Mm-hmm.
to have a purpose, to live a life, to have a family, all that. Basically, an unlimited possibilities on this side, one possibility on this side.
Yeah, I love
And
that you said service right away, that you recognized there was a choice between go one way and die, which you weren't scared of up to then, um, or go the other way and be of service, because there's such an important piece. We're talking about authenticity on this podcast. And to me, authenticity is finding the essence of ourselves. And it was Gandhi who said, if you want to find yourself, lose yourself in the service of others.
I like that Gandhi guy.
Yeah,
I
he's pretty
really do.
cool dude,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you get out and did you check yourself into treatment?
Well,
Uh,
what had happened is I was on conditions, of course. I had
mhm,
to, thanks to my parents, God, God willing, um, they were giving me one last chance to help, and
mhm,
they gave me that chance. And with what happened to me, I swore that I would do my best, and I would live the life of the son they deserved. So they gave me that chance. So I owed it to them. I owed it to myself. Um, the condition was I had to go to a treatment center,
mhm,
um, in Kelowna here, and I was
mhm,
there for 2 years. It took 2 years before I was actually able to be in society, like a productive member of society again, because
mhm,
it was almost like being in a coma for 15 years, because
mhm,
I didn't even know how to communicate with people.
mhm,
I literally had to take classes on communication, on
mhm,
boundaries, on assertiveness,
mhm,
on I did therapy with child regression and all that stuff.
mhm,
I did it all,
mhm,
because I was willing to do whatever it took. And my sponsor told me that too. He said, you have to be willing to do whatever it takes.
mhm,
And so what I did was, I essentially, since I didn't know how to live, I didn't, like I said, Pam, I didn't even know how to speak to people. I
mhm,
spoke, my method of communication was violence.
mm.
People who know me today, they can't even fathom that about me, which
I
is
can't fathom it because the moment I met you, I just like, I mean, I know you're a big dude and I can imagine that you were menacing at the time, but I just think you're like a Buddha and I just always want to give you a hug. And you just like radiate this really kindness from within you. And so it's quite something to hear that you were completely the opposite.
100% complete. It was actually so bad that they had to they advised the guy that I asked to be my sponsor when I was in the treatment center.
Mhm.
The staff advised him not to do it. They're like,
Wow.
he could possibly hurt you, like if
Mhm.
he comes unhinged or anything. Like, I like, when I was I got pulled out of group multiple times during my stay there by major crimes units to question me on homicides.
Wow.
Like, it was like, there was no joke, right? It was.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so he took me under his wing
Okay,
against
I want to just
advice.
do a shout out to him because it's those unsung heroes, those guys that take a chance and they say, you know what, the last chance guy that nobody wants, that's my guy. If I can be part of his redemption, then maybe I'm going to be redeemed. And
Absolutely.
those guys, like, come on, and I mean, you're one of those guys now, Luke, but at the time, without somebody believing in you, it's easy to lose some belief in yourself.
I had no belief in myself. I didn't even, Pam, I didn't even know which way was up and down,
Yeah.
I essentially put my life in the hands of somebody else because I
And
did
and
not,
I love the stories. I want you to share the story of how you learned some humility from him, because this man has been told that you could, go off on him, hurt him, and yet he ain't afraid of you.
not even a bit. Like
Yeah.
I remember we'd have conversations and regularly he would tell me to shut the fuck up.
Mhm.
Or he'd be like, I'd say, and he's like, there's two words I don't want you to say to me is I know. He's like, because you don't know anything. And I'm just
Mhm.
like, so every time I'd say I know, he's like, no, you don't. You don't know anything. And
Wow.
that's why you got me. Right.
Yeah.
So that was the type of guy I needed. I didn't
Mhm.
need somebody to hold my hand and baby me. I was the type of guy I needed somebody to tell me what was what.
Yeah.
That's the type
Well,
of guy I needed.
when you have a strong container like that, that's the only way that you can let go and trust. If
Yeah.
somebody's wishy-washy, I was accused one time. I had a friend, an old friend, who said, "You never work with women coaches." At the time, I always had these like strong male coaches, and I said, because if I sense for 1 second that I could walk over them, I'm done.
Oh,
Like
it's over. Yeah.
I'll be ruling the roost. I need
Yeah.
someone who will call me on my shit. And so
Yeah.
I know, so there's a like a level of respect that comes when someone tells you the truth that you know about yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Because
Yeah.
if I had somebody like I went my whole life manipulating people and finding weakness in people, and I can sniff that out in anybody. Right. So
Yeah.
if there was a like you said, that solid container, if there was
Mhm.
any weak walls in that, I would have I would have demolished them. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it was that. So he was the guy I needed at the time, definitely. But that's the story about the humility. When I really learned humility was this one day. Well, actually, there's a couple things he did that was really, at the time, I thought were quite cruel. But here's me, poor me, right? Quite cruel. But I remember I used to ask him for rides to meetings, right?
Mhm.
I'd be like, hey, the first time I asked him for a ride to a meeting, he literally slammed the car door in my face and drove off. And then I was like,
Wow.
I called him later and he's like, I didn't see you at the meeting. I'm like, well, you didn't give me a ride. He's like, when the fuck is it my responsibility to give you a ride anywhere? He's like, if you want to be somewhere, you'll be there. He's like, you got to get there yourself. You got to show me you're willing to do this. He's like, then I'll give you a ride. But he's
Mhm.
like, until then, he's like, no. And I'm like, okay, all right. So I
Okay.
got to prove myself, right? Like I got to
Mhm.
prove that I'm willing to do whatever it took.
Mhm.
So anyway, so yeah, so he'd do stuff like that, right? Just to get me to take ownership for myself and to
Mhm.
actually do things and do whatever it took. So picks me up one day. I think we're going to Whopper Wednesday at Burger King, and we end up pulling up at the mall. And I don't know if anybody knows the mall here in Kelowna, but at the Bay, there's actually doors that you have to open. Like they don't just open for you; you have to open the doors. So he parks out front, and he looks at me, and he's like, "Get the fuck out." And I'm like, "Okay." So I do what I'm told. I get out, and I walk around to his side of the car, and he's like, "I'm gonna come back here in an hour, and you better be here." And I'm like, "What am I supposed to do?" And he's like, "You open the door for every person who comes into the mall in this entrance." And he's like, "I don't care what you say to him. You can say hi, have a nice day, goodbye, whatever." He's like, "But you will be polite and you will be of service." And then he just drove away. And I'm
He
kind
sounds
of
like a
standing there.
character from a movie. I love this guy.
Yeah, yeah. And it was, and I stood there for a minute, kind of trying to figure out what was going on. And
Mhm.
so I did it. Like I said, I reminded myself, I'm like, I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I'm learning how to live again. There has to be a reason for this. So I did it. And I opened the door for people and I said, have a good day. Hello, goodbye. And you should have seen some of the looks I got from these people, because here's this guy. I was about 170 pounds.
That's really little for him.
That's, yeah, because I'm about 100 pounds heavier than that right now. So I was about 170 pounds with stitches all over my face and stuff from jail, and still a little injured. And so I'm just this mess of a human being, opening the door and saying, "Have a good day," and hello and everything. And so he come right on the dot, hour later, comes back, scoops me up, and we're driving in silence. And I'm like, "So can we go to Burger King now?" And he's like, "Yeah, you earned a burger." So we went to Burger King. And then he made me think about what the lesson was, which was really cool. He actually,
right.
he's like, "Okay, he's like, tomorrow we'll talk." He's like, "And I want you to figure out why this happened."
Mm-hmm.
And
So what was the lesson, Luke?
The lesson was humility.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And to be of service to others with no expectation of getting anything back.
I love it.
Right.
And then he did something else really unique too, which I think is my favorite story. It's hilarious. You have to share this. I mean, we have to have some levity in this in a story like yours, the comic relief. And tell us about the lists.
So I don't know if there's any AA listeners out there, but when you go to AA, they have what's called a beginner's list. So all the old timers in the meeting, when you go there, you have to be. They essentially call you out. They say, "Are there any newcomers here?" And this was another thing when I'd go to a meeting with him. I was too scared to raise my hand to say I was a newcomer, so he would literally like elbow me in the gut and be like, "Put your hand up." And so I'd put my hand up. I'm Luke. I'm a newcomer. So what they do with these lists was all the old timers would write their name and their number on it, so that and then they would give them to me or to all the newcomers at the end of the meeting. And then these numbers you could call at any time if you thought you were going to drink, if you had questions, literally anything, right? Mm-hmm. So they're like, I have these I think there was 4 or 5 lists. I could be wrong, but there was a lot. I think there was 70 plus phone numbers on these lists. Mm-hmm. And so I get these lists at the end of the meeting. We get in his vehicle. I had earned the right to get a ride by now. So I was getting a ride home. And he said, I'm like, "Well, what am I supposed to do with these things?" And he's like, "You're going to call every single person on that list every day for 3 months. Like every single morning, you're going to get up and you're going to call one at a time, whether they pick up or not. You're going to dial that number." And I'm like, "Okay, what do I say?" And he's like, "You say whatever you want to say, but you got to call them." And I'm like, "Well, why?" And he's like, "Because if you don't pick up the phone when things are good, you're not going to pick up the phone when things are bad." It was about building that habit of reaching out. Because if I hadn't built that habit into reaching out, there's no possible way I was going to reach out if something went wrong. Right. So here I was making 70 phone calls a day on the house phone at the treatment center with people getting mad at me and me saying, hey, it's Luke on here. And the person's like, "Yeah, what do you want?" And I'm like, and I remember telling guys, I'd be like, "I'm just practicing." And they respected that.
Yeah.
It was really cool. And I ended up forming a community around that. I ended up making a lot of friends, a lot of dudes that really cared about me, and they took me under their wing. They taught me things. And it was just a really great experience, right? It was a really huge learning phase in my recovery.
I love that. I just think it's such a beautiful way to reintegrate into community without it seeming like you're reintegrating in community, you know?
Yeah.
And community is the necessary component for healing. If there's one necessary thing, it's connection, right? And community. And if we isolate, and if we, what are we doing with all these marginalized people? We push them to the outskirts of everywhere. And I understand people are scared and they don't want to be stolen from and they're afraid, all of the things. I understand that. I've been in front of that a lot in my life as well. But at the end of the day, what we're doing is not working because this crisis is growing. And
we're punishing the sick people, right? We're punishing them for being who they are.
Yeah.
And punishment is not working.
So tell us a little bit, Luke, about addiction as a disease versus just weak-willed people who should get a fucking job.
Oh, I tell you, I have constant communication with these kind of people online,
Mm-hmm.
the moral weakness people. And
Mm-hmm.
I find that they are usually the loudest voices who are people who have never experienced it, right? And they
Yeah.
usually have no idea what they're talking about, right?
Well, I'm
So,
afraid I would have been one of them because I grew up with that kind of attitude. And until my son struggled with addiction, I had no clue. I had no compassion for it, no empathy. I was just like, well, get a job, get over it. Even
yeah,
my
yeah.
ex-husband, I was like, like, you can fix this. What is your problem? I always say to those people who have that opinion, like, well, there by the grace of God go you, because you just got lucky in the genetic lottery.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's like if it's seriously a moral weakness, okay, if it's
Mm-hmm.
about choice, wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
they just choose not to use?
Yeah.
They just choose not to do it. Like what? Like why would they do that? It's just like it's a baffling thing, but it's very. The thing is though, is it's so complex, right? Like there's a biological aspect to it. There's a psychological aspect to it. Um, there's a social aspect to it. There's a
Mm-hmm.
cultural aspect to it. There's an environmental. It just the list goes on. So it's so complex when you try to reduce it to a simple moral failing, it just doesn't fit. It's been proven scientifically and medically for years now that it's a complex brain disease or disorder, whatever you want to call it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
of course, there's still people that hang on to it, and I get it, right? People get frustrated, people get angry. I even have people close to me that still believe that, right? Even with
Yeah.
me being who I am, it's you're trying to change somebody's belief system, and we all know how that goes, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's just about educating people
Mm-hmm.
and providing them with the most accurate information so that they can make the decision themselves.
Yeah. And there has to be there's a certain amount of readiness that has to accompany, the desire to get well. And I think for some people, it's they hit their rock bottom, whatever that is. But I know with my son, there was no rock bottom. It was just
No,
a descending into hell. There was nothing that could have been worse, and he just kept going. It really was a readiness. And I remember that I had reached out to a person that I know who was in the same kind of lifestyle as you and had same kind of recovery story. And I asked him, like, is there anything I'm missing? Should I be doing something? Because he's, involved with these people and I'm afraid for him. And he said, if he lives till he's 30, he'll make it, because it gets fucking old getting smacked in the head with a brick all the time. And he's like, so just like hang in there, because if he makes it, and lo and behold, it was right before his 30th birthday that he got clean.
and
And
I just want to do a little shout out to Nick too, because that kid, he
Mhm.
is a miracle. He's
Yeah.
one of those ones that I got to admit, Pam, I didn't think it was going to happen.
Yeah. But he had a
Yeah,
guy like your sponsor who was like, the more that people said that they didn't want him, that they said he was unsavable, that he was trouble, that he wasn't, like, don't waste your time on him. He said, I want that fucking guy. That's the guy I want. If I can help him, then my whole life is worthwhile. I'm going to do everything I can to help this kid.
yeah.
And Nick
Thank
saw
God.
that belief, and that it was that belief, I think, that changed it for him. He looked at Nick differently than all the other guys did.
Hmm.
Now, in the recovery community, in the treatment centers, I want to just talk about this because I don't think the general public is aware. Relapse is a part of the disease of addiction for many, many people. In fact, most people who
Say most, yeah.
most people, it's a part of the disease. And the hope is that the relapses get fewer and further between and shorter, and then eventually we get long periods of sobriety. That's a realistic goal for a lot of people. Not
Yes.
everybody finds it right away. And yet, our treatment facilities, if you relapse, pack your bags and say, don't let the door hit you in the ass on the way out while you go live in the park or whatever you're going to do, because you can't be here.
Yep. See you later.
Tell me how that is helpful to a medical condition. if an expected outcome of the disease is present,
Yeah,
they
it's
glue you to the curb.
a chronic relapsing medical disease. That's
Mhm.
what it's defined as, right? So literally the definition of it is what they're punishing them for. They're punishing the person for being who, I don't want to say who they are, but they're punishing them for the illness that they're suffering from. It'd be
Yeah.
like punishing a diabetic or somebody with cancer,
Yeah.
you know? So
Yeah.
to me, it doesn't make sense. I understand because I'm an ownership guy, I'm a responsibility guy.
Mhm.
I get it. I understand that they, you know, you got to take ownership for your responsibilities, but we're going to kick you out when it's -40 out and you got to go sleep in the street.
Mhm.
That doesn't help anybody. That has nothing to do with ownership. That has nothing to do with responsibility. That has to do with, in my opinion, that's cruelty. In my opinion,
Yeah.
that's
I agree with you. I witnessed it so many times with my son getting kicked out, and he had it coming. I mean, he lots of time,
I'm not
and
going to say they
him
don't.
getting kicked out, him getting kicked out never helped him once.
No,
It just made him have more shame and hide more and isolate more. And it was really just because he got a last chance with uh, the fellow who wound up sponsoring him, Ronnie, and he was lucky to find somebody to believe in him and do things a little differently. He just like tried to love the kid, you know?
yeah, yeah, and I just wanted to touch on one thing you said earlier, Pam, about rock bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, for many people, rock bottom is death.
Yeah.
They don't get it for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
They accept. I've literally been with individuals who literally tell me, they're like, I accept that I'm going to die like this. I'm going to die of an
Mm-hmm.
overdose. I'm going to die, and I'm okay with it. And there was a sense of peace about that it was almost, I got to admit, it was almost envious to talk to this individual because he
Mm-hmm.
was so at peace with what he was doing. And
Mm-hmm.
who am I to tell him he's, doing something, or like he should be living a different life, right? And
Yeah.
sure enough, he died of it, right? He died
Mm-hmm.
of his disease. But for many people, they don't get it. And that's the sad part about it
So,
is
what can we, as the general public, what can we do in terms of being better at being part of the solution instead of just judging and separating and othering these marginalized people? How can we be better? Are things like the group that we're running, Loving Your Addict, are these things helpful in society in general being better?
I believe so. We actually had an open house at the place I worked when we opened up,
Mm-hmm.
and it was, neighbors, service providers, everybody came through, and they were asking questions, and they were inquiring, they were curious, right? And we did get a lot of angry people,
Mm-hmm.
and but at the same time we educated them, and they were shocked. They didn't, they're like, oh, we didn't know this is what a shelter looked like, and what happens in a shelter, and all this stuff, and what kind of stuff these people go through.
Mm-hmm.
But I think education and awareness, like true education, like on exactly what we're dealing with, so that people can understand that it's not just, you know what I'm like what you said, just get a job, right?
Yeah.
You know,
I'll tell you
it,
what, these guys that are in addiction, that are out on the street, they work harder than you and I ever work just to stay alive. Every day. They walk miles. They are they're looking for food. They're looking for their fix. They're trying to stay alive. They're trying not to get beat up and rob themselves. So to call them lazy is such fucking bullshit.
oh, yeah. And my sponsor, again, he told me, I remember him saying to me, he said, if you work 1/64th,
Mhm.
if you expend 1/64th of the energy you used to get loaded into your recovery and into your life, he's like, you got this thing licked. Like you'll be
Yeah.
successful. And
Isn't that
he's
crazy?
absolutely right. I see it every day, how tired, these people are, how exhausted they are from that daily grind, right? That daily grind. And I think it's important for people to understand this one key thing that I share in our group. And I share it with a lot of people that just, it really puts into perspective how powerful this disease is. So we have a hierarchy of needs, right? And at the very top is survival. It's in us that we're human beings. We are built to survive. And we use that as our guiding principle every day. Like, I have to survive today to live a life. So I'm going to do everything in my power to survive. When an addict uses a substance or whatever their addiction is, that addiction goes above their own survival. Their brain chemistry is designed that way. The brain acts that way, that it gets put even above their own survival. That's why you see addicts relapsing and overdosing over and over and over again, is because their brain is literally being rewired to essentially conquer something that has been hardwired into us since we were born.
Right.
That's how powerful it is. And if people can kind of understand that, I think that really shines a light on this, like how powerful it is and the severity of which that this disease progresses.
So we can't control whether they use or don't use. That choice that they get to make at some point. Hopefully they have their obsession removed, or they become ready, or, whatever it is that is their transformational journey. But what we can do, like as a mom, I had a point when I was like, my kid's going to die. He's a fentanyl addict. He's going to die. And what can I control? Well, I can't control his using, but I can control me. And I can control how I show up for him. And I can control learning how to understand and communicate. And I can control having some boundaries that allow me to love him more generously. And I can control making myself ready, because if he does get into treatment, which thankfully he did, if he does get well, I can't show up in the relationship the way that I was, because I was part of the problem. We learn to react together. We learn to fight. We learn to yell at each other. And if I can't control me, there's no hope of us having a relationship even when he's well. And I then become part of the problem, which may lead to relapse. So in my estimation, I had to take control of the healing I needed to do. And I think that we need more awareness around that aspect. Luke, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, because exactly what you said. If you're not in the headspace, the spiritual space, the ability to have a container where he can be who he is, if you're not there, it's not going to work. That's why they call it a family disease, is because it affects every single person in the family. The addict essentially becomes the family's addiction.
Yeah.
So that's how it affects everybody. It's like this whirlpool of chaos that nobody knows how to, and it's like a black hole, and everything's getting sucked into the center of this black hole, which is the addict. And nobody knows how to get out. And of course, being a parent or being a loved one, you think, I'm going to love them. I'm going to give them money. I'm going to make sure they have a place to stay. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Right. But all that's happening is you're enabling, and enabling can actually do more harm than good. Right.
Yeah.
But if you put yourself, like you said, in your journey, what you did was you put yourself in the best possible position to help him. Right. You took care of yourself so that you were able to help him. And then look what happened. A success story. Right.
Yeah.
So it was, I'm so grateful.
And that also wasn't a straight line.
No.
That also wasn't, I had moments where I was not good. I was not perfect. And there's times I enabled him, and there's times because it was easier for me to sleep at night.
Yeah.
If I pay for a hotel room for him, then I know where he is.
Exactly.
And I made bargains with myself. I said, the one thing that he needs, no matter what, is a phone. And so no matter how many times he got his phone stolen, I would just buy him a new freaking phone, because I need to know that I can get a hold of him so I know if he's alive. And so, I made bargains, but it was a progression to get to a point where I could, if I said yes, it was wholeheartedly. If it was no, I had no problem holding the boundary. I knew that I could control what I could control. And the boundaries changed as I got better at it.
Yeah. Like you said, and it's not a straight line. It's a growing growth experiment,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You were learning how to navigate this just as much as he was.
And I think our purpose here is to become the best version of ourselves and share it with the world, as I said earlier. And honestly, my son being an addict woke me up. That was the catalyst to make me a way better version of myself. And it continues to make me a better version of myself because I want to help people. That's all I want to do in my life is help people. And I would not have been there if not for going through his addiction. So as much as I wouldn't wish it on anyone, and especially my child, I'm grateful. I'm deeply grateful. And I'm
Yeah.
grateful to hear journeys like yours because this wakes people up from this slumber of automatic and our assumptions and our stigmas. And it challenges us to confront our inner smallness, our pettiness, our attachments, and the things we cling to. And we have to actually let that go and burn ourselves down to recreate something new. So it's not just the addict that has to get burned down and humbled to open up some doors at the mall. The family's got to get a little humble too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was really thinking about the title of your podcast too, Paul. Authenticity Unleashed is really cool because I was thinking about that word authentic, right? I think it's it's a very complex word. I went down the rabbit hole on it in my mind a little bit, and I came to the conclusion that my authentic self is to express myself honestly and to be of service to others.
Yeah.
Right? Because
Yeah.
I was of service to others in a certain way, and
Mm-hmm.
then I call that the dark side, and then now I'm of service, and I call myself, might sound cheesy to people, but I call myself a light warrior, where I
Mm-hmm.
essentially bring light to where there's darkness, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that authentic word to me is just so, knowing yourself very deeply, accepting all parts of yourself for what they are.
And understanding, like you said, expressing yourself from where you are, like it's going to change. Your opinions are malleable. We can't hold ourselves to the version we were last year or last month. I've learned more. I know more. My ideas about the world have maybe shifted. And so authenticity is not necessarily about holding on to parts of ourselves. It's like being willing to shed parts of ourselves and continue becoming, to continue remembering our divine nature, remembering who we are and what we're really doing here, can be the cause of miracles.
Yeah, open to change and growth.
Earlier, when your sponsor said, I don't want to ever hear I know, and this is the thing that I'm finding out about being authentic is I say I don't know a whole lot more, and that feels way more true than when I was trying to impress everybody in my life.
Isn't it so much easier just to
Yeah.
say, I don't know? Like,
Yeah.
I say that, I said that 4 or 5 times today.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I'm willing to learn, and I'm willing to navigate that space with you or whatever the situation was. But there's a freedom in saying that and admitting
Yeah.
that humility, right? Being
Yeah.
humble about it.
Yeah, I love it. Now, Luke, you mentioned earlier that we are co-writing a book. There's actually with several authors on healing through the trauma that addiction causes. And these are stories of hope. And this book should be ready in the fall. So stay tuned for that. You're
Super
also writing
exciting.
your memoir, which is pretty exciting. And
Yeah.
I'm very stoked to learn more about you. You're Luke Skywalker now, but you were Darth Vader back then. So I'm more.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
I'm
it's been a project I've been working on for a long time. So I'm a perfectionist, but now I think with writing with this book I'm working on with you, I think this has really helped me kind of not finish it, but really kind of narrow it down and put more focus on it. So it's got me back in the writing mode, which is good.
Yeah. Now, this crisis, this opioid crisis, this mental health crisis, all of it coinciding post COVID, it's getting worse. And no one seems to have the answer. And this is another I don't know, because it is such a biopsychosocial problem and it's complex. But what I do know is that we can all choose to work on ourselves. And so I would like to invite the listener, if they love someone who's struggling with addiction, if they're struggling themselves, every Thursday night, 7 p.m. PST, Luke leads a group along with our friend Levi called Loving Your Addict. And everyone's welcome. You can come as you are. It's on Zoom, so you can come from wherever you are. There's no prerequisites. You can just listen, take notes. You can share if you want to share, get a little guidance if needed. And it's a place to come together and heal ourselves, because that's the one thing. I'm 100% responsible for me and my results, and I can't help to serve humanity if I'm not good in myself.
If you're not authentically yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I really encourage and invite everyone to, we'll put the link in the show notes, but to come and check out the meeting link. Luke is an extraordinary facilitator. Levi is amazing as well. And this group is free always, and it's here to help people. And Luke, what would you say is one wish that you would have? You are on in the trenches, the front line. If there's one message of, that you could give to the regular folks who maybe have some opinions about it, what would you say?
I recently learned what the difference between empathy and compassion was. And to have empathy for somebody is essentially to lower your energy frequency down to their energy frequency so that they match. So you can essentially feel what they feel. Mm-hmm. And then compassion is managing to keep your energy higher, mm-hmm. and still able to identify with what people are going through, right? Because mm-hmm. I never knew that before, and I just learned this. So if I could say anything to people, is to be maybe not be judgmental and just maybe show a little compassion, mm-hmm. and put yourself into other people's perspectives.
Well, curiosity is the cure for judgment. And it's the bridge to compassion. So to get curious, to say, I don't know, and get some education on it. Yeah. And the one thing I would add to that is no one wants to be an addict. There's not one person out there who's addicted to something that wants to be in that predicament. No. And if you can keep that in the forefront of your mind, I guarantee you're going to treat people better.
Yeah, that's perfectly said.
Thank you for sharing so candidly. Thank you. I think it's so hopeful, Luke, when we can hear somebody who went so far in the other direction, who's come back, and not only come back from it, but is like a force for good in the world. And people need to hear stories like this, because there's a lot of parents out there that have lost hope. There's brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers that have lost hope. Don't lose hope. Luke's a miracle. My son's a miracle. There are miracles out there. And even the kids that don't make it, that overdose, if you can keep your relationship intact and love them through it, that's a miracle too. And so let's all be a cause for, and hold space for the miracles in life.
Because they're possible.
Yeah, they sure 100%. Are.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Luke. And we'll look forward. I'm sure we're going to chat again.
Oh, of course. Thanks, Pam. It was a pleasure.